So let's kick off with the first question,
Yeah.
Laurie, and that's really just a question around before we started working together, what were your biggest challenges and frustrations?
I'd say the catalyst for me getting in touch and starting this journey was 1.5 years of secondary infertility. That was the trigger, but that was sitting on a foundation of poor sleep, high stress, physical things like like acne, thinning hair, headaches, things like that. And the more I'd been seeing on your Instagram, all of these things felt very relevant to my situation, and realizing, okay, this is all one big situation rather than a bunch of separate situations. It kind of felt like, okay, I think it's worth taking the next step and trying to figure this out. Fertility was the trigger, but it wasn't the whole picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, like you say, the main focus was fertility and tried to conceive for 18
Mm.
months or a year and a half. Alongside that, you were also noticing all those other really common PCOS
Yeah,
symptoms and wanting to get some control back.
absolutely. And also having the less well-known manifestation of PCOS. When you go to the GP, they're often expecting you to be heavier than you are, or to not be ovulating or having periods. I was having all of those things. That's not how my PCOS was manifesting. To see from your Instagram that it's still PCOS, and to know that what was going on, rather than just thinking, oh, I have bad skin. Yeah.
Laurie, in that situation, how did you find the GP dealt with that when you didn't tick all the boxes from a physical appearance of PCOS? How do you felt you were received or treated by the
Um,
GP?
when I started looking into fertility testing, there wasn't obviously much treatment available to me because it was secondary infertility rather than primary, but they were thankfully willing to offer tests. Every time one of the tests came back clear or wasn't significant enough, they would say, oh, you don't have PCOS. But I know that's not how it works. I've been diagnosed with PCOS by a gynecologist in Cape Town, and I have many of the obvious symptoms. So the fact that at this point, maybe I don't have cysts on my ovaries, but I did previously have them, it was surprising to me to see them almost seem like they don't understand what it is or how it works, or that the symptoms are in flux the whole time. So there was definitely a degree of them being quite dismissive of it. And that was the specialists, which was especially disconcerting. The GPs would often be surprised when I said I have PCOS, and they'd be like, really? Well, yes. So I never really felt like they were knowledgeable about it, suggesting that if I was ovulating or having periods, then obviously it's not a problem. There's nothing else that I should be worrying about, when clearly there is other stuff I should be worrying about.
Yeah, absolutely. And then where do you go from there, right? If all the tests come back as normal, um,
Yeah,
but
or
then you're
borderline. Yeah.
exactly, you're still experiencing those symptoms, it's then a case of, okay, what do I do now? And how were you managing your PCOS before we started working together?
Um, Not very well, to be honest. I had some vague understanding that my diet was playing a role in lots of these things, but as an emotional eater and somebody with a chronic sweet tooth, I wasn't really maybe doing my bit to kind of control that, and not having the knowledge of how best to make those choices. It was kind of like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm just not going to try, if that makes sense. It's difficult to give up something that you love, or at least reduce something that you love, if you're not confident about why, like if it's going to work, or if you're even doing the right thing. That was quite apathetic and not
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you're not getting the advice and support from healthcare professionals,
Yeah.
I guess it is then a case of, okay, well, what do I do now? And when you didn't get help from the GPs, where did you go to for your advice on PCOS?
Social media. Social media and Google.
Yeah.
There is lots of stuff, and you start to see patterns. Sometimes you can tell when it's somebody being sponsored to promote a product or something like that, and I instantly go skeptical. But you start to see trends and things that make sense, like overlap between different people who are not doing that. Your content in particular rang very true, because I recognized all of my issues in a list. I'm like, oh, okay, that explains everything.
How would you explain your relationship with food prior to working with me, and how is that different now?
Okay, so I've always had a craving driven relationship with food. I've never been very enthusiastic about food preparation. I love eating. and I like eating lots of things. I'm not a particularly fussy eater, but I don't enjoy being in the kitchen. I wouldn't say I've ever been a terrible eater. I don't eat huge amounts of takeout. I don't drink fizzy cool drinks. There's certain things that are quite normal that I just don't do because I don't particularly enjoy them. But I was very partial to chocolates and pastries and cakes and things like that. I think sometimes I would go for those not only because I was peckish, but because I was maybe feeling a bit sad. It would kind of be like an emotional eating situation and not really thinking about it.
How has your relationship with food changed since you've been working together?
So I'm definitely thinking about each thing. It's not just an automatic, I want that, grab it, eat it. There's a moment of pause. And then that's also coupled with a better understanding of what's actually going to happen if I just do this, because I didn't really have any understanding of the physical mechanism of PCOS. Like, well, why is it causing all these other things? I didn't actually have the link between the food and the sleep, or the food and the skin necessarily, but having that understanding of how this is kind of setting off this chain reaction and how it's going to affect my life more broadly has been very helpful in just giving me that moment of, wait, maybe I should try this, or have a bit less of that and pair it with this. I enjoy those things so much. I don't want to give them up completely. One of the great things about this course is finding a way to keep them, but make them work in a way that's not so destructive. So finding that balance of enjoyment, but also nourishment is, yeah, it's changed my perspective on the whole thing, knowing that I don't have to give it up, but I can make better choices with a broader diversity of foods and things. That's completely changed how I buy things, how I shop, and what I do when I open the cupboard.
Absolutely. Being able to enjoy the foods that you love is so important, because as soon as we cut them out, that's when things go the other way. That's not a very sustainable approach. What we've been working towards is finding an approach that works for you, that you're able to continue long term, because you achieved your main goal of conceiving. That was a big step for you and your primary goal. But then after that, it's a case of, okay, well, because you've got PCOS, there's an increased risk for gestational diabetes. And because you had that in your first pregnancy, it's really important that that was an element that we worked on.
Yeah. And it's not just about the sort of snacking either. I mean, I was focusing on snacking when I was talking there, but also the meals, like being able to continue to make the kind of cheat meals, but the easy meals that I've been making, obviously adding in other things too, but with those meals, enhancing them in a way that's actually not difficult. I just didn't know what choices to make, just adding chickpeas to something, or really simple solutions that elevate something that's easy to do. Having the actual thought to do that wasn't even there before. So just giving that really easy strategy for, I don't necessarily have to have lots of time to cook every single day.
What were those things that enabled you to be consistent?
So yeah, it was kind of a weird timing with the course. When I started, I wasn't pregnant and everything was a certain way. Then very quickly it was like, pregnancy, moving house, losing one of my parents. It was just a complete roller coaster, very tumultuous time, which I think is the time that it's easiest to kind of just go off the rails and just eat cupcakes full time, which probably would have been my approach any other year. Full disclosure, there were definitely days where I did succumb to the cupcakes, but having that knowledge and confidence about the choices that were healthier for me and for the baby definitely helped bring me back on track over and over again. And then when you have made those better choices, you just feel so much better. Like, okay, I can't control the world, everything's chaos, but I've got this. And that's just mentally, even beyond PCOS or fertility or anything, just in terms of mental health, it's really good to have that feeling of like, okay, I've got this. I'm going to come out the other side of this and I'll still be healthy. So having that sort of helpful, practical, I can raise any questions or concerns, but not have to worry about feeling like a complete failure if I've kind of gone off the wagon a bit for a few days. That helped a lot because there was no anxiety connected to that, where there's anxiety everywhere else, but not in this situation. So yeah, that's mentally very helpful.
Absolutely. And I think it's that element of having compassion, right? And that self-compassion as well, and recognizing that we're human and we're going to make different choices. Maybe those choices aren't always the best, but also those opportunities, especially where life gets a bit crazy and throws you loads of curveballs, those are opportunities to learn, right? Laurie, what would you say to somebody who was thinking about working with me but wasn't 100%?
I would say go for it, because if you're thinking about it, you're probably in the same broad headspace that I was in when I was thinking about it. and probably for similar reasons. And yeah, it really helps to have that guiding hand, not only for the physical benefits in terms of eating better, sleeping better, understanding the connections between your stress and your food and your sleep and all of that, but also just the mental aspect of changing, where it doesn't feel so much like change as just being guided along to make slightly better choices on the path that you're already on. It doesn't feel like, difficult overhaul of everything. It's just guiding you towards better choices. And that for me has been hugely helpful. I think your approach is perfect. Learning to put a lot of those things that I felt were self-criticisms, things that are wrong with me, to be able to contextualize them a bit within understanding more about PCOS yeah, it's great. I would say, yeah, absolutely. Sign up. It doesn't matter if you have wobbles or if you're not sure about stuff, because you can just kind of gather all of those questions. Every time I've had a question, you've either answered it straight away or helped me work towards an answer that works for me. And so I feel confident about food choices, supplement choices in terms of like knowing how important sleep and rest and all of those kind of things, how those are impacting each other. Yeah, definitely go for it.